translation together with us, okay? Lo voy a decir en español, Javerín, vamos a hacer la mayoría del teques en inglés, asumimos que la mayoría de ustedes entienden inglés, va a haber una parte pequeña en español, va a haber obviamente traducción al inglés, y después vamos a pasar a la charla de Shraga Milstein, la cual va a ser obviamente en inglés, ya que no sabe español, okay? Javerín, so let's begin, and it's very nice to have you, or all of you here. In the name of the Maskirut Olamit, welcome to everyone. As every year, we gather here as a Zionist youth movement to commemorate Yom HaZikaron LaShoah VeLaGvura, the Remembrance Day for the Holocaust victims and the heroes who stood and fought against the horrors and death. But we gather here not only to remember, but also to learn about the part that took HaNoar HaTzioni and the youth movements in general during the days of the Holocaust. In those difficult times, and in that context, our Chaverim and Chaverot understood that they were forced to give response to many unexpected challenges, while their lives were tragically reshaped. That included the ability to understand the needs, and especially the courage to act. The Tnuot was, until then, mainly focused on education, but then it was forced to be the safe home for many by taking care of the most basic needs to survive and save lives. This heritage was also kept in the first years of the State of Israel, where many youth villages of HaNoar HaTzioni were created to absorb youngsters and children who were left without their families. After our small ceremony tonight, we will have the honor to hear about this unique chapter from one of its main protagonists, our dear chaver, Shraga Milstein. But first, we would like to invite Yoel Montvelivsky, chairman of HaNoar HaTzioni, to address a few words. Yogi, bevakasha.
Dear friends, it is in times like this when we're suffering what is a comparatively mild crisis, something that should help us to understand how hard it is to even start to imagine what our brothers and sisters suffered during the Shoah, the sacrifices they made, and most importantly, how significant their act of bravery were during those terrible years. It is our responsibility as the current Jewish generation to ensure we are strong together, that we are all united by our historical bonds and by our cultural links, that we are here to protect not only ourselves, but also those who do not have the strength in order to protect themselves. Our Tnuot, the HaNoar HaTzioni Olamit, has the responsibility to remember and to learn from our past. We have to create a new generation of humanistics and Zionist leaders, and we need to ensure that events like this will never, ever repeat themselves again. I have faith in all of us together that we will be able to ensure this. We owe it to our brothers and sisters, all of them who perished during the Shoah. We owe it to their sacrifices, and most importantly, we owe it to their courage and to their bravery. Hazak ve'ematz.
Yogi, thank you very much for your words. In the State of Israel, the Yizkor prayer is recited nationwide every year to commemorate the victims of the Shoah. Yizkor is a special prayer that we recite on behalf of a member of our family who has passed away. Today, we are here together as the great family that we are, renewing our commitment to remember those who were killed because of hatred and tyranny. We would like to invite Benjamin Kessler, Madrich in HaNoar HaTzioni in Hungary, to say a few words and recite the Tfilat Yizkor in memory of the victims of the Holocaust. Benjamin, bevakasha.
Shalom, Chaverim. As some might know, the Hungarian government played a big part in handing Jews to the German soldiers and putting them into ghettos. This is why we feel a particular responsibility to educate and to remember the horrible acts that happened not only in Hungary, but in the whole world. As one of the main kanim in Europe, it is our responsibility to remember and carry on the light that our ancestors suffered for. So now join me in reciting the Yizkor prayer. I will stand up 1 minute. יזכור אלוהים נשמות אחינו בני ישראל, חללי השואה והגבורה, נשמות 600 רבבות אלפי ישראל, שיום תביב ושי נהרגו ושי נחנכו, ושי נקברו חיים ואת קהילות הקודש, שחיים נזרבו על קדושת השם. יזכור אלוהים את עקדתם עם עקדת השער, קדושי ישראל וגיבוריו מימי עולים וצרור חיים את נשמתם. וכן הם הווים והנעימים בחינום במותם לא נפחדו. ינוחו בשלום על משקטיו. ונאמר אמן.
Amen. Thank you very much, Benjamin. Many of our brothers and sisters stood against the Nazi regime, sometimes understanding the fate that awaits them, but with pride and still fighting for their rights and their lives, as did the partisans. We would like to invite our dear Chavera, Dani Rapp, to sing the song of the partisans, Shir HaPartizanim. Dani, bevakasha.
Sog nicht keinmal als du gehst dem letzten Berg, nimm lem bleiene verstellne bloje Tag, kommen bet nach unser Haus gewend gescho, zweit apoid vor unser Trot mir seinen do, kommen bet nach unser Haus gewend gescho, zweit apoid vor unser Trot mir seinen do, von Grimmer Palmeland bis Beitelland von Schnein, mit unser Do, mit unser Pai, mit unser Bei, gefallen ist spritzt von unser Blut, sprotzen Bett noch unser Wure, unser Mut. gefallen ist spritzt von unser Blut, sprotzen Bett noch unser Wure, unser Mut. So nicht keinmal als du gehst dem letzten Berg, nimm dem Bleiene, verstellne bloje Tag, kommen mit nach unser Ausgebend gescho, zweit apoid vor unser Trot mir seinen do.
Thank you very much, Dani. We would like to invite Adi Nisman, Madrich in HaNoar HaTzioni in Costa Rica, to address a few words. Adi, bevakasha. Adi, por favor.
Muchas gracias. Hoy es un día muy fuerte para mí. Casi toda mi familia viene de Polonia y por ende son sobrevivientes de la Shoah. Yo tuve la dicha de poder conocer a mi bisabuela Sonia, la cual fue sobreviviente de Auschwitz y sobrevivió a la guerra entre los 12 y los 17 años. Vivió toda su vida cargando el número 1737 en su brazo. La pusieron en la fila para los crematorios y se salvó. Le dio tifus y sobrevivió. Siendo tan solo una niña, luchó cada día para salir adelante. Sus sueños siempre fueron terminar sus estudios e ir a la universidad, formar una familia y hacer aliyah. 191 sobrevivientes de la Shoah fueron los que llegaron acá, a Costa Rica, a formar la comunidad. Hoy en día tan solo quedan 15, a los cuales podemos honrar con vida. Lastimosamente, mi búa Sonia es una de las que no nos acompañan más hoy en día. Yo recuerdo como para cada vez que le pedían que hable en un teques o la entrevistaron, contaba una historia que nadie había escuchado, que le había ocurrido a ella. Me pregunto que cuántas historias más habrá tenido y nunca nos enteramos. No solo ella, sino que cada sobreviviente, y las historias que quizás no conocemos de millones de víctimas. Me gustaría leerles una pequeña frase de Elie Wiesel. ¿Cómo se lloran a 6 millones de muertos? ¿Cuántas velas se encienden? ¿Cuántas plegarias se oran? ¿Sabemos cómo recordar a las víctimas, su soledad, su impotencia? Para finalizar, me gustaría dejarles un pequeño mensaje que es mi respuesta a estas preguntas. Nosotros, como Javerim de Tnuot Noar, debemos mirar atrás para recordar tanto a las víctimas como a los sobrevivientes. Cada vez menos pueden contar su historia. Nuestra respuesta como Tnuot Noar es la más fuerte: educar y seguir educando, porque estoy seguro que es lo que cada una de las personas que estuvo en la Shoah hubiese querido, que eduquemos, que contemos sus historias, sigamos con su cultura y tradición y fortalezcamos Am y Medinat Israel.
Adi, thank you very much for your words. And those who didn't understand, the bottom line, Adi, is that our responsibility is to continue educating. This is the best duty, the best task that we can do today as a Zionist youth movement in order to maintain, not only to remember, but to maintain the heritage and to avoid these tragic events. For sure, we have the best ammunition in our hands, that is the education and our responsibility as madrichim and educators. Thank you, Adi, for your words. Javerim, thank you for your participation in the ceremony. Now, we would like to invite you to stay with us to hear a unique part of our history with our dear chaver, Shraga Milstein. Shraga survived the horrors of the Shoah, came to Israel as a young kid, and since then, for many years, made constant efforts to remember, educate, and build. שרגא, בבקשה, הבמה שלך.
תודה רבה. We'll do it in English, I understand. חברים, it's a pleasure to join you on this special occasion of Yom Hashoa. And as leaders of HaNoar HaTzioni in Europe, let me start with some general remarks about the movement in the 20th century. HaNoar HaTzioni in Europe was established during the early part of the 20th century. In the European countries, in each country according to its local conditions, and together with other Zionist movements, created a new concept, national Jewish identity, not depending only on religion. Hundreds of thousands of young people left their homes and joined the Zionist dream to establish a state for the Jewish people. Members of the various youth movements, including HaNoar HaTzioni, established new settlements, kibbutzim, across Israel, working physical labor. They left their families behind and gained new friendships, fulfillment of their dreams, and a community based on equality, fairness. They lived in austerity, working hard in agriculture in order to establish the physical foundations for the Jewish state. Yochanan Cohen, one of the founding leaders of HaNoar HaTzioni and former member of Kibbutz Tel Yitzchak, wrote, "The youth movement encouraged values and behavior standards of friendship, trust, and a strong commitment to rebuild the Jewish people and the state of Israel." During the Holocaust, the youth movements were in the forefront of organized resistance to the Nazi occupation. The organized Jewish leadership in the ghettos was forced to represent and manage the daily life of the Jewish population. And all points of military resistance were led by youth movements. The ghetto Warsaw is a well-known example of it. Resistance was in most cases impossible, but wherever it occurred, the youth movements were the leaders of it. The big hour of the Zionist youth movements, including HaNoar HaTzioni, came after liberation and the end of World War II in 1945. When the war ended and the gates of the concentration camps opened, 250,000 survivors remained in Europe, among them around 20,000 children, more than half of them orphans from both parents. It was the Zionist youth movements, including HaNoar HaTzioni, who together with the Jewish Brigade and the Mossad for Aliyah Bet, Youth Aliyah, and Aliyat HaNoar, who provided for the survivors a roof over their head, a clean bed, and education. I will illustrate it with my case. I was liberated in Bergen-Belsen in April 15th, 1945, at the age of 12. A British armored car entered the camp and declared that we should not worry and we are free. nobody knew what it means, and nobody understood English. However, the change was very profound. Within hours, the German Nazi guards left the camp or away. We didn't see them anymore. And soon, the British army provided for us a clean bed and a decent meal in a nearby camp of the Nazi army. Let me quote for you to understand what the situation was. It's a quote from Brigadier General H.L. Greenhughes, the Chief Medical Officer of the 2nd British Division, who arrived on site with the advancing British forces. And I quote, "The British soldiers did not believe their eyes. They were shocked and perplexed at what looked like the sight of hell. Piles of corpses were scattered everywhere. One such heap in the women's camp was very high and about 80 yards long. This sight, with all its horror, was mild compared with what we found inside the barracks. Living people were lying next to dead corpses. There was no hygiene, there was no water. The walking skeletons could not get up to take the little food we provided them." End of quote. The British took us, as I mentioned, to a nearby military camp of the Nazi regime, about a few kilometers away, where we found a clean bed, food, and a smiling face. Because you have to understand that living in Bergen-Belsen, and I was there for only 3 months, but there were 3 very long months, was something terrible. You just didn't know what is going to happen. So there were a few phenomena which I remember until this very day. First of all, hunger. We were very hungry, and food was provided, some soup, kind of soup, and a piece of bread once a day. Later on, we had no knowledge of what has happened. Now, Bergen-Belsen, there was no executions, but many people died. And as I already mentioned, about 15,000 corpses were found in Bergen-Belsen after liberation. And the British decided to take us away from there and bury the corpses and burn the whole place in order to avoid dysentery and typhus, which were the main causes of death, in addition to hunger and lack of water. Now, we were shifted to this camp, and from there, the Swedish government, with the Swedish Red Cross, invited 12,000 women and children, survivors of Bergen-Belsen, for convalescence to Sweden. And I was among them, as was my brother, younger brother, Mordechai, who was 3 years younger than me. Now, we joined the group that went to Sweden, which was known as Back to Life, and was divided or scattered in various children's houses in Sweden. One such child home was attended by a shlicha that came from Eretz Israel. Her name was Yehudit Bergman. She was a teacher in Mosinzon, in Magdiel, in Kfar HaNoar, and gradually our life was turned to more or less normal. Many of us could not rid themselves of the idea that there's plenty of food and bread, and it will be so tomorrow. But as it happened, we started learning because I, as I mentioned, was 12 years old. I had my bar mitzvah in the Stockholm Jewish synagogue, and slowly, we turned to normal life. Now, I'm mentioning this because the shlichim that came were all associated with youth movements in Israel, and HaNoar HaTzioni was very prominent among them. And let me say that it was the Zionist youth movements, including HaNoar HaTzioni, together with the Jewish Brigade, the Mossad for Aliyah Bet, and Youth Aliyah, Aliyat HaNoar, who provided for the survivor a roof over our head, a clean bed, and education. I was, as mentioned, liberated in 1945 and arrived in Sweden in June 1945. Now, back to our main story. All over Europe, there were tens of thousands of children there were tens of children's homes housing each between 150 to 200 children aged 8 to 15. In each of them, there were tens of group leaders, madrechim, and teachers sent as shlichim by the various youth movements in Eretz Israel. Through 1946 to 1947, many of them, of us survivors, reached Eretz Israel and were absorbed in kibbutzim and youth villages run by teachers and youth leaders, madrechim, of the various youth movements. HaNoar HaTzioni played a major part in its strength, in strengthening existing kibbutzim. Are you all right? Do you see me?
כן.
כן? בסדר? And youth villages run by teachers and youth leaders, madrechim of the various youth movements. HaNoar HaTzioni was both strengthening existing kibbutzim and took part in it. Among them were known kibbutzim to all of us: Tel Yitzhak, Ve'adasa, Timurim, Kfar Glikson, Alonei Abba, Alonei Yitzhak, Magdiel, Nitzanim Youth Village, and of course, Ein HaShlosha, who already existed but absorbed members of the Pritea Shoah who came to Eretz Israel through illegal immigration, Aliyah Bet, as ma'apilim, or on illegal ships. The best known among them was Exodus 1947, on which there were many members of HaNoar HaTzioni, and among them my wife, Aliza, who was born stern and ready to, and was also in the HaNoar HaTzioni group. I would suggest that this be the introduction, and I'll be glad to answer questions or hear comments. You all right?
Shraga, I want to ask something. You told about the youth movements in general and also HaNoar HaTzioni by taking part of the youth villages, creating youth villages. Do you think there was something special regarding HaNoar HaTzioni that was unique or different from the other youth movements that really was something to be proud of?
Yes. HaNoar HaTzioni, first of all, was the biggest youth movement in pre-war Europe. It was a general, liberal, Zionist youth movement that advocated all the principles that HaNoar HaTzioni educates for until this very day. This is one thing. The other thing was the quantity. There were very many shlichim among those who came to Europe from HaNoar HaTzioni, youth villages, kibbutzim, and so on. And I think it had it is still, by virtue of adherence, more people to HaNoar HaTzioni after World War II in Europe than any other Zionist movement.
Chaverim, if you have any other questions, Shailot, preguntas, feel free to ask here in the chat, or you can open your mic and ask for more questions.
Hi, I want to ask, did you have some kind of preparation before like taking the ship of the Mapilim to come to Israel?
No special preparations, but we were traveling in groups because each children home was traveling as a group to Eretz Israel, which helped us throughout the journey because we knew each other, we were friends, many among us, and we understood what we were doing. We were told that because of the British mandate, there's no legal entrance to Eretz Israel, and we have to travel in ships that avoid the British Navy guarding the shores of then Palestine. I remember that we were very excited about it because our madrechim prepared us very well. And I remember until this very day, the excitement of seeing the Haifa beach and the Carmel from the ship. But as I mentioned, the fact that we were friends who knew each other, actually lived beforehand about 2 years together, helped us throughout the journey. And of course, when we landed, where were we sent? To Magdir, to Moshenson Youth Village, or to the Mossad Haklai, as it was called then. And sure enough, Judith Bergman, in the meantime, returned to Israel and was one continued her teaching of our group in Magdil. So there was a well-organized transition that enabled us to be absorbed in Israel, and all through the various, in this case, through HaNoar HaTzioni. But it so happened in other youth movements as well, including kibbutzim and so on. I want to mention, especially in this case, Youth Aliyah, Aliyat HaNoar, which was headed then by also a member and graduate of HaNoar HaTzioni, Moshe Kol, and placed thousands of youngsters in groups in kibbutzim and in the youth villages in order to continue our education until it was completed. Then we were drafted to the Israeli army. But in my case, it happened already after the War of Liberation at the end of 1949.
Shraga, we have some questions that arrived in Spanish, so I'm going to translate. Okay. If you can mention what were your main learnings from the word tovanot in Hebrew. מה היו התובנות המרכזיות from the previous the Aliyah and after the Aliyah? What was the things that for you were the main tovanot, the main learnings you had before the Aliyah and during the process of Aliyah?
So the tovanot, or the understandings, teachings,
what you understood and learned from that experience.
I understand the question. Were the beliefs of HaNoar HaTzioni to be a member of a group, to cooperate and care about co-members of the group, and devote our life to the building of the physical foundations of the Jewish state. I, for example, in Magdil was Raftan. I was milking cows. And this was 4 o'clock in the morning. Then I got home, washed, etc., ate something, and teaching started only at 2 o'clock. Because the message that was transferred to us was that, first of all, we have to work, we have to provide for ourselves and for others, and only then are we free to learn normal studies. So that's the way, that's what I remember as a main concept from this period.
Thank you. Matthias, I think you want to ask a question, right?
Yes, thanks. I wanted to, hello Shraga first. Thank you for sharing your story with us. I wanted to know a little bit more about your childhood before the Holocaust, your family, where you were born.
Well, thank you. I was born in Poland, in a town of 50,000 inhabitants, a third of them Jews. We were a well-to-do family. The name of the place is Piotrków, somewhere between Warsaw and Lodz. And we were a well-to-do middle-class family. My father was a businessman. My mother didn't work. There was a girl at home helping, taking care of us, of me and my brother. And life continued very calmly. As I mentioned, I was born in 1933. In 1939, September 1st, I was about to go to first class. And as you know, in Europe, school begins September 1st of every year. And as it happened, instead of going to school, I was close in a ghetto because the Germans established the first Jewish ghetto on Polish soil in our town already in October 39. So, and then of course it was a shock, because all of a sudden you're not anymore independent. You're bound to stay in your room. You're not allowed to leave your house without accompanying adult. And later on, of course, very sad story about this ghetto. It was out of 23,000 Jews who lived in the ghetto and the surrounding, and joined the ghetto from surrounding places. In 1943, the ghetto was cut to 3,000 people. And that's where I learned the infamous name of selections. We were all taken out to a big square and had to walk 3-4 in a row. And the ranking SS officer stood on a big truck, on a lorry, and pointed with his finger, left, right, and so on. At the end of the day, some of us, including me and my family, were told to go home to our places in the ghetto, and others were boarded trains straight to Treblinka, and none of them survived. How we, my father, mother, my brother, and myself, stayed together, I still don't understand until today, but it was luck, I guess, in a way. And every survivor thinks, when he is asked, why did you survive? Or how did you survive? I always say, I don't know. It was luck. That's all. That's how it happened. Thank you.
We have a question from Zoe. Zoe, we have 2 more questions. Okay, one question from Zoe.
Hi. Firstly, I wanted to thank you for sharing your story, because I think these stories are really important and they personally inspired me to be really proud of my Jewish identity. So my question for you is, what message would you give to young people, to students, or to people in the youth movement who still today experience anti-Semitism, and how can they take it upon themselves to be more proud of their Jewish identity in the diaspora?
Well, I will answer your question with a little story, which is a Jewish habit, as you know. I am quite active in cooperating with various organizations in Germany who are teaching the Holocaust. One of them is Bergen-Belsen, where I was liberated, as I mentioned. And a few years ago, I spoke to the leadership and some of the older students, and I asked them a question. What makes you third, fourth generation of the Nazis to teach the Holocaust? Why do you do this? And the answer was, we don't only do it in order to remember those who perished, we also do it for ourselves. And we teach that actually the Holocaust did not happen or did not start in the gas chambers and the crematoria. It started when people discriminated between one human being and another. And one was inferior and the other was superior, and therefore could do anything he wanted. And this is the message, to keep always in mind what inequality between human beings can bring to. not all reach the stage of the Holocaust, but the first step of deterioration is always equality. Relate to others as equal and with human compassion. That's the message.
Shraga, one last question for now. You didn't mention before, but you were involved in the Masua Institute.
Yes.
You were the head of the Masua Institute. For all of those who don't know what it's Masua, it's an institute in Tel Yitzhak, in our kibbutz Tel Yitzhak from HaNoar HaTzioni, that it's one of its goals is all the remembrance of the Holocaust, and by doing educational programs with schools and people from abroad. And this is a question pointed to you as an ex-member of Masua. What do you think is the tafkid, the role of the state of Israel and places like Masua, Yad Vashem, and other institutes in the remembrance of the Holocaust, and understanding that in the next 50 years, we are not going to have the survivors anymore, probably.
Yeah.
So what is the main role of the state of Israel as a state in the remembrance of the Holocaust?
First of all, let me say that the Holocaust is taught today in hundreds of universities around the world, and providing institutes like Masua, like the Holocaust Museum in Washington, Yad Vashem, and all the research of the past is aimed, in most cases, that such terrible things will never repeat themselves. Now, I say most cases because you see, in Israel, there are some discussions on it. Some people believe that because we are Jews and we lost 6 million of our brothers, we can do things that others are not allowed to do. And this is not the case. I am a firm believer that equality, as I mentioned before, of human beings is the ground on which all human behavior is built. And this is a message from the Holocaust. And the fact that not all cases discrimination led to such extremity as the Holocaust doesn't permit inequality.
Chaverim, thank you very much. Shraga, thank you very much for your time, for your dedication, al hashka'a, for your investment. It's always very, very warm to have you here with us and sharing your story, your personal story and your professional story. We see you as a chaver lanetzach of HaNoar HaTzioni. It's good to have you in the HaNoar HaTzioni family. It's good to of being part of our rich heritage in the history of HaNoar HaTzioni. באמת, מהלב חזק ומץ, שרגא, חזק ומץ, לכולנו.
Thank you very much. And best regards to David Manor, whom I saw at the beginning, and to all of you who participate in this session. Thank you very much.
Shraga. To all the חברים, thanks for being with us, חזק ומץ. Until the next time. חברים, לילה טוב, ערב טוב.
ערב טוב.
ביי ביי.
תודה רבה.
חזק ואמץ.
תודה רבה.
חזק ואמץ.
ביי.
תודה רבה.
חזק ואמץ, תודה רבה,
ביי ביי.
להתראות.
להתראות.